Now from Washington, the Inside Scoop. All the news the government does not want you to hear. Now, here's your host on the Inside Scoop, Mark Levine.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. Let's say you're driving on the freeway, maybe on the Washington Beltway, and you start going a little fast. There's a truck in front of you. You go 75 miles an hour. Or maybe you're out in rural areas, and the speed limit is 65, and you happen to hit 80, and there are those lights in your rearview mirror. You pull over, you get a ticket, and you're guilty. You were going 80. You were trying to get somewhere a little faster than you should have. All right, you need to pay a fine. What's the fine? $3,550. No joke, my friends. In Virginia, a law sponsored by Republicans Dave Albo and Tom Rust have made it an incredible fine. And it's actually not even really a fine. What this is, in fact, is fees. It's a tax. The Republicans in the state of Virginia did not want to tax people to pay for transportation needs, so they decide they're going to tax traffic scofflaws. But is $3,550 a fair speeding ticket? It's not just Virginia, my friends. In state after state across the nation, they are using this user fee, scofflaw fee, whatever you want to call it, to fund their budgets. Is that the right thing to do? Let me know what you think. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK. The local number is on your screen. To discuss this issue, I've invited George Burke. Now, George Burke is the chair of the 11th Congressional District Democratic Party, and I'm honored to say that starting tomorrow on Monday nights from 7 to 8, George is going to be hosting similar to what I do right here on the Inside Scoop, only as I handle national and international issues, George is going to handle Virginia and local issues. George Burke, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, let's talk about this bill and the genesis. Where does it come from? Dave Albo and Tom Rust had this grand idea to tax speeders.
They've been pushing similar legislation for about 3 years, maybe 4 years, and each time the General Assembly has voted it down. The impetus this year was to pass a transportation bill. Virginia has not had a transportation bill in 21 years. The governor called upon them to do one. But the Republicans in the General Assembly continued their cowardice. They refused to raise taxes, so they created some hidden taxes. One are these abuser fees, as they're called. Virginia's slogan used to be "Virginia is for lovers." I think now it's going to be "Virginia isn't for drivers."
Welcome to Virginia. Slow down.
Unfortunately, it only impacts Virginia drivers. It does not impact out-of-state drivers.
Now that's really strange. You're telling me that if a Virginian goes 80, they get a ticket for $3,550, and if a Marylander goes 80, they get a ticket for $100.
They just get a ticket. Number one,
that doesn't seem fair.
Apparently, it's unenforceable unless a state has a similar fee in that state. Number one, and number two, they had no way of getting those fees. Virginia can suspend a driver's license from another state for a speeding ticket if they fail to pay the fine. They cannot get similar redress from another state if they fail to pay a fee or a tax.
Because the fee, in essence, it really is a tax.
Correct.
And the question really in this case goes back to the big transportation bill. Now, Northern Virginia has had transportation needs that the rest of the state, frankly, hasn't
Hampton Roads is in a similar plight.
Okay, so there are other areas in Virginia that have. But my understanding is Northern Virginia gives more money to the rest of Virginia than they give to Northern Virginia.
Correct. Northern Virginia is by far the wealthiest portion of the state. As we know, it's the Silicon Valley of the East now. There's a lot of money here, and far more tax dollars go to Richmond than come back to us.
So, in other words, if Northern Virginia were simply to get its fair share in taxes, in other words, you wouldn't need to raise taxes on Northern Virginia if the rest of Virginia would say, all right, what you tax goes to the rest of Virginia. Would you be able to pay for the transportation bill based on that excess?
I'm not sure that's the case. Our highways are covered and handled and maintained and built by the state.
Right.
So whether or not current taxes as paid down there, but the reality of the matter is that we help to pay for schools in Southwest Virginia.
Well, right, exactly.
Where they don't have a tax base to speak of, and we can't complain about that because we are a commonwealth, we are one entity, and we have to make sure that there's education down, for good education.
Well, absolutely.
For those
Well, I guess
students.
what I'm saying is, since Northern Virginia pays more than its fair share in
Correct, yeah.
taxes, the idea that it would have more transportation needs than the rest of the state, it would seem to, to follow. They pay more, but they have more needs, so that's okay.
The reality of the matter is that the legislature needed to pass a new tax, whether it was an increase in the gasoline tax or a new tax. That's what they needed to do. They basically abandoned their responsibility in that effect. They passed these abuser fees, and they created two taxing districts, one in Hampton Roads and one in Northern Virginia, where we will get additional taxes placed on us, which will be dedicated funding for Northern Virginia
Well, here's
roads
what I
and
don't
same
get.
with Hampton
So
Roads.
when it comes to Northern Virginia roads, the rest of the state expects Northern Virginia to pay for it. But when it comes to Southwest Virginia schools, the rest of the state expects Northern Virginia to pay for it. So either way, Northern Virginia doesn't get its fair share. And I'm just wondering, is that because Northern Virginia is mostly Democratic and the rest of the state's mostly Republican and they have the majority?
I think that there's a general feeling in Richmond that Northern Virginia is a bunch of carpetbaggers and we're a different part. We're a different
We need a
different
secession
world.
movement, I guess. No, but here's what I'm trying to figure out. If the Democrats were to take the majority in the Virginia legislature, would we have more fair treatment of Northern Virginia?
I think Northern Virginia would continue to help support other regions within the state because there's a need down there. They just are more rural. They don't have the tax base. I think that the Democrats would be more responsible and come up with better ways to pay for transportation, whether that is an increase in the gas tax. And who's going to notice with gasoline over $3 a gallon?
Well, most states have a higher tax too. Plus,
Correct.
we end up conserving energy and encouraging people to buy hybrids and other things like that. I actually think it would be more fair. I think if the Democrats were to take over, given that so many Democrats are based in Northern Virginia, they would say, well, look, we'll pay our fair share. We have heavier transportation needs, but we're paid more taxes anyway. So it would seem to me to be a fair way. So basically, they didn't want a gasoline tax. And they couldn't just call it a fine because a fine has to go to schools.
That's constitutional. By the Constitution, it has to go to literacy, i.e. schools, correct.
So they have to call it a fee. Now Virginia's not the only state that does this. That's why this is not just a state issue, but indeed a national issue. I can say that I was stopped speeding in California, and the fine was $50, and the user fee was $250. And the interesting thing was, at that time, my speedometer was broken. I got the fine lowered to $25.
Still had to
Thank
pay
you
the
very
fee.
much. It really didn't help in terms of the user fee. Why does government have to lie to people like this? I mean, it seems to me that if you want to tax people, you call it a tax. But this sort of very tricky system where you fine the speeders in order to promote transportation, I mean, why does government have to do that?
I don't think in this instance it's government. I think it's Republican politicians in Virginia who absolutely refuse to pass another tax. The last time there was a tax increase in this state, it was under Governor Warner's administration, and some Republicans joined with Democrats to pass some very responsible taxes. And the Republican Party in the primaries that took place this year literally tried to take out some of the senators, some of the more moderate Republican senators who in fact supported that tax increase. They are dead set against it, come hell or high water.
So they won't pass a tax, but they'll pass a user fee.
Which is much sneakier, no doubt about it.
I mean, so if we don't call it a tax, it's not a tax. That's the Republican position.
Well, there's a lot of talk that this is going to impact the working poor more than anyone else.
Well, it certainly will, because if you have a lot of money, $3,000 for a ticket, it's $3,000. But that's for the working poor, they've got to. I mean, why don't they do this? Why don't they say since $3,000 is could be 10% of someone making $30,000 dollars a year. Let's just say that you're taxed 5% of your income. 5% of your income. You make $30,000, then you only have to pay $1,500. You make $1 million, well, then your fee will be $50,000. That at least would treat everyone equally. Does that have any chance in Virginia?
No.
None whatsoever.
No. I think one of the most egregious things about this whole bill is if you're a young man is picked up for having bald tires or tires that are below the legal limit or driving with an obstructed view in his rear window. Well, he's going to face the fine for that plus another $1,050 in fees.
Now,
and he'll lose his license if he can't pay it. And then what happens? How's he going to get to work, particularly in rural Virginia?
Sure, he'll drive without a license.
He'll drive without a license. He'll get caught again. He'll face another
He'll go to
fee.
jail, probably.
And face the fee. He'll
Now,
still have to pay that
the
fee.
driving with an obstructive view, that was one of the interesting things to me. A guy that maybe has fuzzy dice in his window, something like that?
I think there are probably some parameters for it.
You got an umbrella in the back. I got an umbrella in the back seat of my car. Is that an obstructed view? I don't know.
Many years ago, when I drove home from college, my back seat was filled to the roof.
Yeah.
Would that have been an obstructed view?
Yeah, well,
and how many college students do we have doing that in Virginia?
So now, Dave Albo and Tom Rust have had this bill year after year after year, and every year it's been voted down.
Correct.
But they managed to sneak it into the omnibus transportation bill. This wasn't a standalone bill.
Correct.
This was some bill with 2,000 pages, the massive compromise because the Republicans didn't want to raise taxes. They snuck it in.
And I wouldn't even call it a compromise. The reality of the matter is the Republicans ruled in both houses of the General Assembly, and they said, this is what you're going to get, nothing else, and that's what they presented to the governor.
Well, and Governor Tim Kaine signed it.
He had no choice. I mean, he was pushing for a transportation bill. We haven't had a transportation bill in 21 years. The need is absolutely critical at this point. The governor made some changes in it to make it constitutional, but I would guess that he held his nose in signing this thing. There's a call now among some Democratic and Republican legislators to revisit this when they meet in January. There's even one Republican calling for special session, but I think the governor would and other House and Senate leaders will not let that happen because the legislature will pass all sorts of additional legislation right now. The only reason we have a transportation bill this year is because it's an election year for all these Republicans and, of course, the entire General Assembly.
And otherwise, the people would be mad and they'd throw the bums out.
They had to come back and say, see, we passed a transportation bill.
Let me ask you, in terms of the bill, you have a list here from the Virginia Supreme Court. We talked about driving with an obstructed view. We talked about if you go 80 miles an hour when it's a 65-mile-an-hour zone. And folks, I'm not saying people should do these things. I'm not saying you should go 80 miles an hour. I will admit that I've done it. I'm confessing right now to law breaking. In fact, I'm fair to say the only laws I break, I don't do drugs, I don't cheat on my taxes, I do speed, all right? I have a lead foot, and anyone can check my public record and find that out. But it's not terrible. I mean, I've never come close to losing my license or anything like that. Tell us some of the things.
Well, first of all, there are 4 pages,
all right,
literally 4 pages of this stuff here, but it goes, I mean, there's some very serious stuff, driving while intoxicated,
right.
Refusing to take a breathalyzer
with
test,
thousands of dollars fees
consuming alcoholic beverages while driving,
with those.
Operating a school bus without a license. But you get down to all the other the catch-alls.
And here's what struck me. It's $1,000 for driving while intoxicated and $1,000 for going 80 in a 65-mile zone.
Because they consider it reckless driving.
But see, that's very surprising to me. I mean, DWI, it seems to me, is far more severe than going 80 in a 65-mile zone. I mean, if going 80 in a 65-mile zone is $1,000, well, DUI should be $10,000 because I think it's 10 times more serious. You truly risk lives. Whereas, going 80 in a 65-mile zone.
Failure to stop when entering a highway is $350 a year for 3 years.
Failure to stop when entering a highway.
Failing improper turning without using a turn signal is $1,050.
$1,050 for not using a turn signal. Folks, what do you think about all these things? The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK. There's a local number there, too. Do you support this legislation? Do we need to punish these drivers once and for all and get them off our roads? Or do you think the legislature's gone a little too far? We'll be right back right after this.
History has demonstrated that violence only begets greater violence. And injustice only begets greater injustice. This is not the tradition of our great nation. This is not how we want the United States to be known around the world. We have another tradition that we think ought to prevail. One that is more just and more powerful. There is a better way. If we truly want peace and security, then we must work hard for justice. If you're concerned that we've become a nation whose national policies are grounded in beliefs that are centered on a line embedded in BS, then don't miss Escape from Orwellia Nation, a talk show in which concerned regular citizens like you and me, not self-serving media spinmeisters, wade through the barrage of newspeak and doublethink that pollutes public discourse today. Big brother, big business, big media, and the big national parties who collude to keep we the people afraid and in the dark would prefer that you not watch. Show them who's in charge. Tune in to Escape from Orwellia Nation right here on Channel 10.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. Have you ever gotten a speeding ticket? Many of you have. I admit I've had quite a few. Do you think you should pay thousands of dollars for one? And do you think the government should use that money to finance programs that, they don't want to pass a tax on? Discussing this issue with me is George Burke. He's the chairman of the Democratic Party's 11th Congressional District. He was a longtime press secretary for the National Association of Firefighters, also worked for members of Congress and so forth. And he's going to begin a new show tomorrow at 7 o'clock Inside Virginia. So hopefully you'll continue to tune into the Inside Scoop for national issues, and we'll have George for state issues. But this isn't just a Virginia issue. One of the reasons why I'm discussing it on my show, states across the nation have done this, right?
Michigan, New Jersey, New York, and Texas all have similar fees, but they're more modest in their amounts.
A few $100, or a few $1,000.
The New York Times said Virginia has become the worst state in the nation to drive in.
Really?
Correct.
Literally the worst. And I know it's not just those states, too, because I know I had it in California, but like I said, it was a few $100 rather than a few $1,000.
In Pennsylvania, they charge you an EMS fee, which helps them pay for their emergency medical services, figuring if you drive fast, you're going to be using those services at one point or another.
Well, that may be true.
Again, it's much more modest fee.
But if I probably would have less of a problem with it if it were in the hundreds rather than the thousands of
These
dollars.
fees are paid once. They're not paid in installments over 3 years, as they are here
And if
in Virginia.
someone can't pay, they lose their license.
They lose their license, and if they live in a rural area or even live here in Northern Virginia and they drive again, they get caught again, they get additional fees. Once they rack up a certain amount of points in a given year, 6 points I believe it is, they start getting charged additional fees. So it's conceivable that someone who had a run of bad luck could be owing the state of Virginia thousands upon thousands each year, and it's just a downward spiral.
Give me some more in the elbow rust bill of examples. Again, I don't have so much problem with the DWI ones. Give me some of the more, let's say, lesser offenses.
Operating with improper brakes, speeding 20 or more above a speed limit.
Operating with improper brakes. Does that mean if the brakes squeak, you could be, how much is that?
I think that's $1,050 over 3 years. Passing on the crest of a hill, not a good idea. But that could run from $1,050 to $3,000.
Passing on the crest. Oh, you're talking about like on a two-lane road, hopefully.
Presumably, yes.
Okay, what else?
Passing two vehicles abreast. That could cost you anywhere from $3,000 down to $1,050
I don't even know what that
years.
means,
I'm not
passing
quite
two
sure
vehicles
either.
abreast.
I think that if, as we're all want to do, you're on a two-lane road, somebody's going to be making a left-hand turn and there's a car coming the other way and you have to go around them on the right, technically you can be cited for that. Just as you can be cited for not using a turn signal to make a turn.
How much is the turn signal?
$1,050.
$1,050.
And if it's
If you
due to
change a
felony,
lane and there are no cars around except a cop car 100 yards back, you change a lane on the freeway.
technically you are in violation.
$1,000.
Correct.
Now, I'm not saying it's good not to use your turn signal. You should use your turn signal, but $1,000.
And again, we talked about the ball tires, and ball tires are not necessarily ball tires, but tires that have less than 1/10 of an inch of tread.
If a cop stops you because you got ball tires, all right, and they should stop you for that. I would think they pull you over, and they basically tell you for your own safety you need to get new tires. People are going to get new tires. And frankly, I would have a ticket where if you got the new tires, the ticket was dismissed. But it's not like that, is it?
No. Even if, as long as you are found guilty of that offense, you are charged that fee over 3 years, and the judge cannot waive that fee. If the judge finds you guilty,
the judge can't waive the fee.
Judge cannot waive the fee.
In other words, if you're on minimum wage trying to support your family and you end up because of this not losing your license and not able to go to your job and your family gets put on welfare, sorry, you still have to pay it.
The only way a judge can quote unquote waive the fee is by finding the person not guilty of the
Well, so now we get a whole crazy justice system where we have judges knowing you're guilty, finding you not guilty because of policy reasons, because the legislature. One of the interesting things about all this bill is sponsored by Dave Albo, the Republican legislator from Springfield. He is with a law firm that handles driving offenses?
Correct.
So in other words, he stands to profit big time by this bill?
Yeah, we call it the Lawyer Full Employment Act.
So in other words, people who might pay a $100 fine because they were speeding, suddenly there's a $3,500 fine. They're going to say, whoa, I'm not going to pay $3,500. I have to hire a lawyer. And Dave Albo, the guy who wrote the legislation, who knows it best, hangs out his shingle and says, I'll defend you?
Correct. And quite frankly, most of the time you'll still be found guilty. Generally in such cases, the fine may be dropped or reduced, or the charge may be reduced, but odds are you'll still face that fee. Right.
So in other words, if it's $3,550, the $50 might go down to $10, but you'll pay $3,510, plus you'll pay Dave Albo your fees. He'll get a nice little hefty piece of this.
What's funny, not funny, but interesting, is virtually every newspaper in the state has editorialized against these fees.
Okay.
Every single newspaper.
Now, Albo, you would think, would have trouble running for re-election. He's running for re-election, but he has no opponent.
He's unopposed. His luck held out because, quite frankly, the details about these abuser fees did not come out until after the filing deadline to raise.
Now, why is that? The media just didn't catch it until then?
I think the media wasn't paying much attention. They were looking at the dramatics and the drama of the bigger transportation bill.
Yeah, but to be fair, the Democratic Party didn't catch this either.
No one caught it.
Yeah.
No one caught it. And no one made a stink about it. And quite frankly, I think the folks who raised it first were the bloggers.
Yeah.
And then the mainstream media picked it out.
That's the advantage of the bloggers. Now, his co-author, Tom Rust, who supported this bill as well, he is running for re-election.
Correct, as is Albo. He's running for re-election.
Well, but Albo has no opponent. You'd have to write in someone.
Yeah, Rust has an opponent, a gentleman named Jay Donahue. Jay has already been out there taking a whack at Rust for this piece of legislation.
So if you don't like this legislation, vote for Jay Donahue.
I think that there's going to be a bit of a citizens' revolt against many of the Republicans who voted for this. Quite frankly, there were a few Democrats who voted for it as well. And again, I think they voted for it on the grounds that we needed a transportation bill. And they may feel some fury from this as well. There's no doubt about it. The governor signed it. He made some changes. One of the substantive changes that Governor Kane made is there's another provision in this bill that, I think I mentioned, when you reach 6 points, you face a fine, and you get an additional fine for each point above that. One reckless driving type ticket, 20 miles over, 15 miles over on an interstate with a speed limit 65, and you get this 6 points, besides the $3,000 fine. And that 6 points, again, is $100 a year for 3 years and $75 a year for each additional point. So there's all sorts of ways. This is like payday lending.
And this is basically just to raise money. I mean, let's face it, it's the same thing when you get a parking ticket in cities. You think, this isn't about me parking so long. You're just trying to raise money for your jurisdiction.
They're using the criminal system as a tax collection system.
As a tax collection system. Now, to be fair, these are violations of law.
Correct.
They are, generally I would think these are infractions, but as I look through the list there, some of them have been elevated to felonies.
Well, felonies would usually happen if there was a death or a serious accident or serious property damage. That could change. Most of the time they're misdemeanors or violations.
Or infractions.
And most of the violations, the infractions, most of them, they say, that there's no fine, there's no fee levied with them. But we have to wait and see how these are interpreted.
Now, has this happened yet? I mean, it started July 1st, right? So somebody has to have gone 80 miles an hour and been caught since July 1st.
I read in an article that there were 525 arrests for DUI and similar infractions and reckless driving in Hampton Roads in the first week.
So these have yet to go through the courts.
No, they haven't gone to the courts yet.
People are getting arrested when they do. I'm scared that people are going to start to outrun the police. They're going to say, you know, I was going 80. Normally I would pull over, but my God, I can't afford $3,000. I'm going to have to try to elude the police.
If they elude the police, they get a $3,000 fine as well.
I'm sure. Listen, I'm not advocating people doing that. But I'm scared that this could lead to very dangerous things where someone says, you know, this will be my whole life if I don't escape. So a speeding ticket turns into this huge, you know, cat and mouse thing running through the streets. It becomes, you know, like a. I mean, we had said in Alexandria, and this is shown in Alexandria as well, a case where a cop was late at night. I'm sure you've heard of this case, and some kids didn't pay for a restaurant bill, and the car was there, and he shot into the car, and somebody was killed.
Yep.
You know, again, you should pay your bills, but that seems to be, you know, death penalty for failure to pay a $10 check is excessive. And largely that's because he thought he had to give chase. Are we going to have cases where for a speeding ticket, some cop has to give chase and people could die?
It's possible. It's certainly possible. You know, we're going to create a two-tiered caste system on our interstate highways. You're going to have out-of-state drivers in the left-hand lane doing 80, 85, as they do now.
Yeah.
Much of, you know,
as I do.
As many people do on the interstates.
I should keep admitting this on the air.
While you're going to have paranoid Virginia drivers in the right-hand lane staying under that 15-mile-an-hour
And the out-of-staters can do it.
Correct.
We have a case where if you've got a Virginia driver going 80 and an out-of-state driver going 120, and they're both caught and stopped, the Virginia driver going 80 pays thousands of dollars more in fines than the Marylander going 120.
Correct.
Well, I would think that would make the Virginia pretty upset.
That's what's happening. That's happening. I mean, all of these legislators.
Does that mean we can speed in other states? Virginians can go faster in Pennsylvania?
I wish.
It doesn't work like that. It doesn't seem very fair. Folks, if you have a comment on this, if you agree with me, if you disagree with George or me, we want to hear from you. What do you think about this? And it doesn't just have to be in Virginia. I know this is broadcast across the nation. Do you have an experience in your state? Are these fair? Should we be punishing these drivers who, after all, are breaking the law? Are these fines a fair way to raise money? The toll-free number, 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. You can also comment on the blog. I know some of you like to write it in rather than to call it in. That's perfectly fine. It's all at radioinsidescoop.com. We'll be right back after this.
A few things.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully States, and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
Let's impeach the president for lying.
My name is David Bell. I am a resident of Virginia's 11th Congressional District, and I ask Representative Tom Davis to initiate or support investigations into violations of the law by President Bush and his administration.
Tom Davis, my name is Jean Reynolds, and I'm one of your constituents. I want you to join immediately with other members of Congress to begin an investigation of the criminal acts that George Bush has committed.
I'm Nick Spengler of Ashland, Virginia, and I would like our troops to come home and Bush to get out of office.
My name is Nancy Maynard. I live in the 11th Congressional District, and this message is for Tom Davis. I'm asking you to please investigate for impeachment.
My name is Bruce Smith. I live in the 11th Congressional District in Woodbridge, Virginia. I want Congressman Davis to support the investigation of President Bush and Vice President Cheney and those that foisted this war on us.
Hello, Congressman Davis. I'm Carrie Plonson from the 11th Congressional District, and I'd like you to take immediate action to investigate George Bush and his offenses in leading this country into a war that's unwarranted and there is no solution for.
We have to impeach. I am just appalled that we would not, quote, waste our time with impeachment. The message to the world has to be that Bush and Cheney are guilty of international war crimes about which we can't do anything. We can do a lot about the crimes committed within the U.S. Constitution.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. We're discussing a new Virginia law, but it's not just Virginia, folks. It's a national question. The Virginia law says that if you're stopped for speeding, say it's 65 miles an hour, and you go 15 miles over the speed limit, you have to pay. It's not even can pay. You must pay $1,000 in fees, and you could pay up to $3,550. It's a new law sponsored by Dave Albo and Tom Rust, who are Republicans in the Virginia legislature, but it's happening around the country. My guest is George Burke, and he is the new host of Inside Virginia, which premieres tomorrow night.
Thank you.
Leonard from Northern Virginia, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Thank you very much. I'm a little old. I'm 80 years old, but I've been a courier in Northern Virginia, all through Northern Virginia, you know. And I want to say one thing. Coming up from Richmond on 95, we do not have the Air Patrol logging in all these speeders, number one. I-66, we have Fairfax County helicopter services, and of course, if you're a driver, you better watch above because you can get ticketed from the air. Great service. Unfortunately, I've experienced some cases where people are doing 65, and it's typically a 60-mile zone. And then when they tumble over because of the road conditions, you could be one of those unlucky or unfortunate people, whether it's on 95 or I-66. I do not travel 81 that much, but 81 and 64. 4 dangerous zones of highways that are being patrolled, whether they're sheriffs, most of them are sheriffs in some parts of the country.
Leonard, what's your view on this law? I mean, obviously, people who speed are breaking the law. It's not a major thing. Hopefully, it's an infraction. But should they be punished to the tune of thousands of dollars for doing this?
Well, what's more important, your life or somebody's life? Come now, you got to realize that these maniacs, I call them maniacs, that are driving these roads are exceeding the limit. They deserve to be controlled. I use the word controlled. And, of course, the only way you can control people is by punishing them.
Well, I mean, the speed limit is 55 a lot,
60 miles.
It depends where you are.
That's right.
Obviously, but sometimes it's 55, sometimes it's 60, sometimes it's 65. The beltway around Washington is 55 miles an hour. And I can tell you that if you drive 55 miles an hour on the beltway in Washington, I suggest to you more people will die than if you drive 65 or 70, because with most of the traffic going 65, 70, if you go only 55, you're likely to be rear-ended, not to mention which we already have huge traffic problems in Virginia, people trying to get where they want to go. This would cause our traffic jams, which now are from, I don't know, 3 or 4 p.m. to 7 or 8 p.m., they would go into 9 and 10 p.m. if everyone were going 55, don't you think?
Well, all right. You brought up a good point about the Beltway. People have no right, and you've heard a lot of cases over in Maryland where they're using the wrong lane, and of course they don't control their senses. You have an accident. Now, on a beltway, it's the same thing. People do not stay in line, and they're trying to help the people around Springfield, Virginia. read the sign. If the sign says this lane,
But
you
Leonard,
stay there.
My point is, aren't the speed limits too low? If you're going to enforce the limit, all right, and you know, to me, if the Beltway were 65 and rural Virginia were 75, then I would really have less problems with these kinds of things. But it seems to me that the limits are simply too low, and they set them too low so that they can then fine us for thousands of dollars and get tax money. That's not fair, is it?
I'm not saying that the speed limits are too low. After being a courier through whole Northern Virginia, I knew one thing. 55 is the limit to me, I'm concerned. No 60 or 65 or 70, because they lose
So you drive
control.
55 on the Beltway?
Well, if you can drive 55, you've got to stay in your lane.
Well, I understand. That's a different question. George, do you have a response?
Yeah, Leonard, how many of those cars that are passing you are from out of state?
Oh, about 1/3.
Yeah, about 40% of drivers in Virginia.
Okay, 40%. That's probably
about 40% of drivers in Virginia are from out of state, particularly on those interstates.
In other words, even though Virginia is the best economical for businesses, and I often wonder why people come from other places to Virginia.
Yeah, but Leonard, how do you feel about the fact that somebody going 85 miles an hour from Maryland has to pay a fee that's about a tenth the size of a Virginian going 75 miles an hour? That's not fair, is it?
I think it's fair. All people should control their driving from whatever state they're from or whatever community they're from or whatever district they're from, whether they're from Northern Virginia, whether they're from Winchester.
You think it's fair to charge Virginians more? All right, Leonard, I appreciate your call. I appreciate your point of view. Let's go to another call. We've got Joshua in Fairfax. Joshua, welcome to the Inside Scoop. They're bringing up Joshua on the phones. While we're waiting for Joshua, George, I mean, obviously there are people who drive 55 on the Beltway. I rarely see them, but apparently they do exist. We have one, Leonard here.
Yeah, I admire him, but I suspect sometimes he's taking his life in his hands.
I don't admire him, frankly, because we have so much trouble during rush hour getting where we're going anyway. And someone who's going 55 on the Beltway, I mean, tell me this, can the Virginia legislature raise the speed limits? Or are there federal requirements?
There are federal requirements. They would lose federal highway dollars if they do.
So they can't raise it anyway?
Correct.
All right, let's go to Joshua from Fairfax. Joshua, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Yeah, how you doing?
Doing good. What are your thoughts?
Great. I was just listening to the past caller, and I do agree that people in Virginia, I guess people do have to be controlled in a way, but my question for you guys is speeding in Virginia that bad that they have to make these fines so much money?
Well, in my view, if it were really bad, they would increase the fine. But these aren't fines; these are user fees.
This is a tax.
Yeah. It almost feels as though it's a big money-making business. And
that's what it is.
If you look at the statistics in Virginia, Fairfax County, Northern Virginia area, and Virginia Beach is top 10 areas for the most tickets given out actually in the United States.
Really? Is that true? Do you know about that, George?
I don't know.
A couple months ago, I read it on AOL on the internet. The statistics might have changed recently, but I know that Virginia Beach and Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. metropolitan area is one of the most affluent areas that they give out the most tickets in the United States.
It's interesting. I've been in the Washington area about 5 or 6 years. I don't find the driving here particularly bad. It's not particularly good either, but I remember when I used to drive in Boston. I went to school in Boston. Now there are bad drivers.
That's
Boston,
a blood sport.
Oh my God, cutting each other off, and I mean there they really probably do need these kinds of fines. I mean I've driven in Los Angeles. I've driven all across the country, Nashville, Tennessee. I think we're about average. I don't think we're much worse than other jurisdictions. Do you, George?
No. I mean, we have heavy traffic. We're a large metropolitan area. I don't fault the police for giving the tickets. All right, if you're breaking the law and you're speeding, you get the ticket, you pay the fine. The problem is the exorbitant fees that are now being placed on top of those fines, and strictly for Virginia residents, and it's for a totally different purpose than the fine.
And Joshua, you understand, they can't fine you because if they do, the money has to go to schools. So that's another reason. Let me go to another caller. We've got Ali from Falls Church. Ali, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me talk to you. I do drive a Falls Church yellow cab. car, and driving a cab means we are on the road over 10 hours. It's not just going back and forth to work. I understand paying $1,000 for speeding sounds outrageous, but I tell you what, if you're doing 80 or over 80 miles per hour on the highway, you deserve a $1,000 ticket, so that next time you will slow down.
Let me ask you this, Ali. I mean, if you're driving 80 on the Beltway, I'd probably agree with you. But we're talking about, there's lots of areas in rural Virginia, and not just there, but across the country, where the speed limit's 65 miles an hour, and you're on an open road, and it's a day, and it's a sunny day, and so you happen to hit 80. I mean, I'm not saying it shouldn't be punished, but do you really think that thousands of dollars is fair?
No, $1,000 is fine because these people need to slow down. I agree with you. You cannot do 55 or sometimes even 60 miles on 66. You cannot do it. Otherwise, somebody will rear into you, or you will cause an accident. I totally take that. I agree that. But to do over 70 miles, and I do drive, and I do 70 miles, and I stay on the far right-hand lane, and I'm scared that somebody will hit me because they are doing 80 miles per hour.
Ali, as a taxi driver, do you think that taxi drivers, and I really have no opinion on this, I'm just asking you, do you think in general they are better drivers than the general public and more apt to follow the law, or do you think they're about the same and run the gamut as everybody else?
About the same. They're not better drivers.
My experience, and there was a period of time I took lots of cabs back and forth to airports and the like. My experience is that taxi drivers tend to stick pretty close to the speed limit because sometimes they can be targets of the police. Many taxi drivers do not own their own cabs. They drive cabs from a fleet. Now, most reputable fleet owners will keep their tires and equipment, et cetera, up to par, but sometimes I'm sure you can get a cab that may not have the best tires on it or the like. If Ali or someone else driving a fleet cab was stopped and found to have defective tires, they would also face a fine of $1,050 or a fee on top of the fine of $1,050.
So, Ali, would you support repealing this law, or do you think on balance it's a good law?
It is a good law. So many times I see accidents on the highway and you wonder, how could this happen? This is a highway, no traffic lights, no stoplights. Everybody's supposed to be on their lane and do 70 miles per hour. That's fine.
What about the folks, Ali, what about the folks from the district who are driving in Virginia, or the folks from Maryland, or the many people who are driving through Virginia to on vacation or for other purposes, or the truckers on I-81, most of whom are from out of state? They are not subjected to these same fees.
If they get into Virginia, they better abide the laws of Virginia.
Yeah, but they don't. I mean, one of the things about this law, Ali, that even if you like the law, and I admit I disagree with you on that, but even if you like the law, the way the law is written is a Maryland driver or a district driver going 100 miles an hour is punished less than a Virginia driver going 75 miles an hour. And that's not fair, is it? I mean, that part of the law needs to be changed, don't you think?
Yeah, I thought the law applies to everybody, no matter
It doesn't. It doesn't. It only applies to Virginia residents because it's not a fine, it's a tax. And the state of Virginia only has the right to tax Virginians. They don't have the right to tax people from out of state. So because it's not technically a fine, people from outside Virginia don't have to pay it. Now, they have to pay the fine. They have to pay $100 or $200 a fine.
I agree with you, absolutely. You cannot only keep Virginians to abide by the law and everyone else out of state, boom, zoom on you. No, it should be for all, or take it off.
All right, Ali, thank you for your call. Folks, if you want to call in and join this discussion, we encourage you to do so, whether or not you agree or disagree with the law, agree with George or with me. We love your calls. Keep them coming. 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. You can also comment on the blog if you're listening on the internet at radioinsidescoop.com. We'll be right back after this.
Some people in Fairfax County don't know what this means.
Some think it's just another channel on the dial.
But it's much more than that.
It's the voice of the people.
People like you.
Your neighbors, your friends,
or your family.
People who want to share ideas,
Opinions.
Cultures.
Lifestyles.
Art.
sports, music,
Events. Entertainment.
History.
Science.
Beliefs.
people who want to learn about television,
Producing.
Directing.
cameras,
Audio.
Lighting.
Editing. Or radio. Talk. Music.
Whatever you think people should hear.
Public access is the place where everyone has a voice.
And it's the place where that voice gets heard.
A place where you can create your own form of personal expression.
So what do you want to say?
Whatever it is.
You can say it here.
Because we're public access.
For the people.
By the people.
It is about balancing our choices between the gray of the concrete jungle and the stunning beauty of the real one, between a stoic facade of granite and the fury of the canyon. It's why there's EarthShare, the simple way to find balance. EarthShare is the workplace giving program bringing the leading environmental groups under one umbrella. Support EarthShare, support them all. EarthShare. Please ask your employer about workplace giving. To learn more, visit our website.
Thousands of kids in this country have everything it takes to go to college, except the money. The United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. Confession time. I am a bit of a traffic scofflaw. I pay my taxes. I don't do drugs, but I have been known to have a bit of a lead foot. I haven't had a ticket in the last 2 years, knock on the table, but generally every 3 years or so, I do see those blue and red lights behind, and I dutifully pull over, apologize, and get my ticket. Usually those tickets are a few $100s, but now with Dave Albo and Tom Russ, Republicans from Springfield, Virginia, and elsewhere, they are raising it to thousands of dollars. My guest is George Burke. He's the chair of the Democratic Party, 11th Congressional District, and he's beginning a new show right here on Channel 10, Inside Virginia, that begins 7 o'clock. It'll be on Mondays. I hope you'll tune in for that. George, you were telling me during the break that there's going to be a legal challenge to this law.
Yeah, but first I want to tell you, you're twice the average in Virginia. The average Virginia driver gets a ticket once every 7 years.
Yeah, well, I said,
so you're about twice the average.
I admit, look, hey, they're the only laws I break. Like I said, I've never done an illegal drug. A lot of people can't say that.
Several things are happening. There are some Republicans and Democrats in the General Assembly who are saying this issue must be revisited. There was even one Republican delegate who suggested a special session. It's not going to happen. There is a software engineer, 28-year-old young man from Alexandria, who started a petition on the internet about 10 days ago. There are already 70,000 signatures on that petition.
Wow. Well, where is that if people want to sign that petition?
I don't have the actual address, but I suspect if you Googled it, he'll pop up.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to put it on my website so people, after the show at radioinsidescoop.com, within 10 minutes after the show, I'll have it up there. You can check it and you can sign that petition yourself.
Then there's the idea of a legal challenge. There are some attorneys talking about two issues, basically, the double jeopardy clause and the equal protection clause.
Well, let's tell people what that is, because a lot of people know what one is, but don't necessarily know what the other is.
In terms of the double jeopardy clause, the fine is a punishment, the tax or fee is a separate punishment. So they're being punished twice for the same offense.
Except that these things have been in states for many, many years. I would think that that constitutional argument has been raised somewhere else.
We will find out when it gets to the courts, if it gets to the courts.
But the equal protection seems to me a stronger argument. I mean, even the people like Leonard and Ali who support this law, when you tell them it's for Virginians only,
applies to Virginians only,
then they start questioning it, and it's this weird convoluted thing. It's Virginians can only tax Virginians, so you can't tax the other people, and you can't call it a fine because if you do, it has to go to schools.
Correct.
Why is it that our fines go to schools anyway?
It's constitutional.
It's in our Constitution. Yep. How long has that been our Constitution?
I suspect for decades.
It was a way just to make sure schools get money.
Correct. It's a way to help fund the schools.
Why not just tax people to fund the schools like other states?
Well, I think there are taxes to fund the schools, but this is additional income for that purpose, and it's just
Isn't
always
it
been
just
there.
a weird notion that driver? I mean, it just seems to me there's two separate issues. One is if you want to punish bad drivers, and one is funding the schools. Why should they be connected?
I think again that we have a different perspective sometimes in Northern Virginia. We are a wealthy area. Fairfax County is the second most affluent county in the nation. The 11th Congressional District is the most affluent district in the nation, and I believe Loudoun or Fauquier, I think it's Fauquier County, is now the wealthiest county in the nation. So we have, I don't want to say high taxes, but we have reasonable taxes here. We have taxes that tend to pay for what we need to have done. When you get into other portions of the state, there are places in Virginia where people still have outhouses. Where they just where the average or per capita income of a family is a quarter of what it is in Northern Virginia, and where
so
they need other
these funds.
Absolutely, and they're also going to have real trouble funding their schools. So this was a method of getting money into
See, I just think
literacy.
if you want to pay for schools, you tax people to pay for schools. You don't go after speeders. I mean, here we have crimes. I guess a bar fight. You can actually knock someone over the head with a bottle and be fined a few $100s.
Correct.
But drive 15 miles. I mean, I don't know about you, but I admit I can go 15 miles over the speed limit, but I would never hit somebody over the head with a bottle. Seems to me that's a far more severe offense. Let me go to another caller, though. We've got Brian from Fairfax. Brian, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Thanks for taking my call. My big question is, one of the major concerns about this seems to be that we can't get the out-of-staters in it, and then as you all were just talking about, the double jeopardy with it being a fee later on. So if that's one of the major concerns, would you guys be against it if, say, we just raise the ticket fine up to like $3,550 for the most egregious thing, and that way you could still get the out-of-staters that were also driving through on our road?
It's a fair question. Of course, there's one problem with it. Well, there's two issues. One is the policy issue, which I'll deal with in 1 second. The other issue, of course, is that we need the money for transportation needs. We have these transportation needs. The Republicans in the Virginia legislature, who control the Virginia legislature, don't want to tax the rest of the state or even Northern Virginia to pay for the transportation needs. And so since they don't have that money, the only way they can get it is from driver fees. If we were to do fines, we could have more money for our schools. Although maybe you could do a little shell game here. Maybe if we had more fines, you'd have more money for our schools. We could reduce the schools in our regular budget and then use that money for transportation. What do you think?
A lot of the money for schools comes from local government. So
there's really not enough.
Still wouldn't work.
It still wouldn't work. There's not enough to do that.
Work.
Now he raises the other question, apart from the shell game, whether I think $3,550 would be fair for someone who's a speeder, and I don't. Now maybe I'm influenced, I'm biased by the fact that these are the only laws that I'm known to break, but I just think that's too high.
The Washington Post called the Virginia General Assembly spineless for attempting to pass these fees instead of passing a general tax that taxes the entire state and raises the money we need for transportation. This is going to raise about $62 to $65 million a year. And the fact of the matter is, if it does cause Virginians to slow down, the revenue is going to drop.
Right.
So it's diminishing returns in the long run.
I don't know what you think. I mean, I think that in many cases our speed limits are set too low. But let me tell you this. I've been admitting all my faults this whole show. I'll tell you this. I have never, in all my years of driving, had an accident that was my fault. And it seems to me that if you have an accident that's your fault, maybe we need to tax those drivers more than those of us who admittedly go a little over the speed limit to get where we're going. I mean, those are the ones who we know are bad drivers who've made mistakes and possibly caused property damage or lives.
But if it's a lot of times there's an accident, well, sure, it's one person's fault over another. And in Virginia, they generally issue a ticket to the person at fault.
Right. But now, would that go up thousands of dollars?
Correct. Yeah.
Now that I have less problem with, because there, you've made a mistake that's actually caused damage. And so I have less sympathy for them than I guess someone like myself, though, I admit my bias here. One thing I have to ask you for our listeners, you're wearing a collar around your neck. I want to assure our listeners that it has nothing whatsoever to do with driving or a car accident.
Correct. That's true.
All right.
That's
okay.
true.
I just want to make sure so that no one knows you're not a priest.
And hopefully I get it off pretty soon.
And hopefully you get it off pretty soon.
I was worried my doctor would be watching, and if he caught me not wearing it, I'd be in big trouble.
Fair enough. Now, it looks like there may be a legal challenge. Do you think when the Virginia Assembly meets again, this law will be repealed?
I think if, in fact, the public continues to apply the pressure that they've been applying now, and let's face it, sometimes the public has a short attention span, but usually not when it impacts their pocketbook.
And not when they're getting stuck with these
Correct.
tickets.
And they'll start getting stuck with them.
Right.
As I said, every 7 years, on average, a Virginian gets a ticket. I think that the General Assembly will revisit it. I can't tell you exactly how. One way may be to add out-of-state drivers and find a way to do it. One way may be to show some backbone and pass a tax. Now, we may have a new Virginia General Assembly. We may have a Democratic Senate.
When does it meet? January?
January, correct.
Okay, of next year.
Yes. So you'll have,
nothing can happen until January of next year at the soonest.
Unless there was a special session and it's not going to happen.
The governor has to call that, and he's not going to call that over.
No.
Can he call a special session only on this bill, or does he have to open it up to everything else?
Once they get into session, they can do what they want.
Okay, so he can't limit it to this topic.
I don't think he would dare. And the governor, I think everybody wants to see how this thing sits for a few months before they attempt to legislate anymore. There were a number of members of the legislature, predominantly in the House, who said they made some mistakes with this bill and they want to correct the mistakes.
But if this bill were corrected, they would still need the money for transportation from somewhere else.
Correct.
So it wouldn't solve the problem of the fact that Republicans don't want to raise taxes. They'll have to do user fees for something else, maybe for a business license, or maybe for parking fees or licenses.
The other fear is that once they get past the election, there's no pressure on them.
I see.
They wanted to use this bill. The only reason I think that the Republicans in the legislature agreed to a transportation bill at all, which raised fees or whatever, is that they had to face the voters this November. And in places like Hampton Roads, quite frankly around Richmond, but particularly in Northern Virginia, and the people who drive I-81, there's a lot of concern about transportation, and they would have dropped the ball. So they had to do something.
I don't get. Our highways are very clogged, at least in Northern Virginia, very much right now. And they're clogged, partly by people like Leonard who are driving the speed limit 55 miles an hour. Won't this bill, making everyone be very, very careful about speeding, cause longer delays, lost, when you work less, it's lost productivity. Won't it cause us to have longer rush hours?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. But the reality of the matter is, even when we make improvements on our roads, particularly here in Northern Virginia, we're still not going to solve the problem. We keep growing in population because it's a desirable place to live. We have lots of jobs here, et cetera, and our roads will never catch up. Ultimately, we have to look for more and more alternatives, quite frankly.
And folks, this is not just an issue in Virginia or Northern Virginia. It's across the nation. We've mentioned several other states where these fees occur. And basically, it's about legislatures playing with the law. We have this law. It's in our Constitution, apparently the Virginia Constitution, that fines go to schools, and they're playing with it, and they're playing with fees and fines and everything. I think legislatures should just tell the truth to the voter, but that may never happen. George Burke, thank you for coming here on the Inside Scoop. Tune in to Inside Virginia. For those of you in Virginia, starting tomorrow at 7 p.m. Keep tuning in to the Inside Scoop at radioinsidescoop.com. This is Mark Levine, signing off.